Right now, over the objections of still grieving families, a judge orders the 911 tapes from Newtown to be released. We will debate that decision. And then Pope Francis sounds off on inequality in our economic system as Congress debates more cuts to food stamps. So whose job is it to keep Americans from going hungry? And later, our legal panel back here. Sexual assaults in the military. Who should play judge and jury, unit commanders or judges? And TV law versus real law, a real world panel that sounds off on the Perry Masons to tell you what actually drives them crazy and what they get right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us this Thanksgiving Eve, Wednesday, November 27th. Now, we start with a pair of updates from a pair of tragedies, each screaming for changes from our political leaders. First, Virginia State Senator Creigh Deeds. He continues to recover after he was stabbed by his adult son. His son diagnosed and slated to be involuntarily institutionalized, but apparently no bed space available. And 4 hours later came the stabbing and the son's suicide. And now Senator Deeds is making it clear who he believes bears part of the burden. Telling his local newspaper, quote, "I am alive for a reason, and I will work for change. I owe that to my precious son." About his local community services board, the entity that runs the public mental health system there, including beds for the mentally ill, he said this: "I have very strong opinions about the CSB and feel like they are responsible. My life's work now is to make sure other families don't have to go through what we are living." And finally, he says, "I hope we can make a positive change as a result of this tragedy. I hope the justice we can get from my son is to force change in the delivery system for mental health services." But from Northern Virginia, we head to Newtown. And this week, we got a state report that took us inside the horrors at Sandy Hook Elementary. And next month, we will go back inside the school where 20 first graders and 6 adults were killed just as the one-year anniversary approaches. Now, a Connecticut judge, he ordered the release of the 911 tapes from the incident, including calls from inside the school itself, even as the families of the victims objected. Now, their wishes, they were not lost on the judge, who wrote in part, quote, "The court recognizes and is deeply sensitive to the fact that the families and friends of those who died in this tragedy, as well as others in the greater Newtown community, may desire that the 911 audio recordings never be released." His response to those concerns: "The question is not if, but when further delaying their release will not ultimately serve to ameliorate the pain the recordings will likely cause to those directly impacted by the shootings." So we asked a broader question here. Did the judge get this right, or should the wishes of the families have been respected? And sounding off here, our panel that knows how to sound off: Tom Doherty, a partner at Mercury and a former advisor to New York Governor George Pataki; Dominic Carter, political journalist and author; and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. All right, we all agree, before we get into this debate here, that it will be heart-wrenching when these tapes are released. And we all agree here that the tapes won't solve any part of the investigation. At this point, we know what happened in that school. We know the consequences, that this isn't going to solve any criminal inquiry here. But you and I were talking this morning about it, Andrew. I feel that there is no service that's done here by serving these tapes, and not just for the families, but there's a bit of a ghoulish vibe I get. It's like the people who stop traffic to rubberneck when they're looking at an accident. It just doesn't feel right to me. But I understand that there's a legitimate and compelling reason why the judge ruled the way he did, and it has a lot to do with our industry.
Well, it does. There's a journalistic need to know and the journalistic right to know what's gone on in cases like this. The 911 calls they're released uniformly over just about any incident that makes the news in something like this, and they're available, frankly, in cases that don't make the news like this. And so there is a need to know. There is a desire for people to know, and for people to try to get inside the school.
Whether it's more to know, but a need to know. Do we need to know what happened inside the school?
I would argue that we absolutely do, and that's the second part of the argument that's not based in journalism. You and I talk and have talked for a year now about, boy, the victims and the families of the victims. That's the best argument in favor of gun control. I would say that the phone calls from inside Sandy Hook Elementary, the 911 calls, are part of that argument as well. That if we really want to get engaged in this debate, hearing the voices, hearing the terror that was on the other end of the line when they called 911 inside Sandy Hook, tells the story in a way that we haven't been able to hear it
Dominic, I
before.
know these arguments and these debates we've had before. After 9/11, remember the debates in newsrooms? Do you ever show the buildings collapsing again? They're going to upset not just the victims' families, but people who don't want to see the images. I can argue the other side of it, which is it's always easy to anesthetize terrible moments. You don't want to show it. I'm taking the easy side of the argument here as it relates to Andrew, because not releasing the tapes here, I think a plurality of people do it. Am I trying to have it both ways when it comes to the rules of journalism?
No, I don't think so. I just don't see any reason why. I don't see any possible reason why the public needs to hear those tapes. Why do journalists need to hear those tapes? Why do journalists, with all due respect to Andrew, but why do journalists need to hear the public agony? And to what right, First
I don't
Amendment
make
right?
Andrew's argument for him, but if you say you get to hear certain things and certain things you don't, who decides what is and is not a public
That's a very
right
valid.
to know?
That's a very valid point. But the families don't want it released. What are we going to gain, except for some sensational headline? What is there to gain?
I mean, when you were at the governor's office, if a tragedy happens, not that it's a governor's decision, but you have to weigh a public's right to know.
Well, what is the public right to know? I mean, the public's right to know is what did the police, what did the firefighters, what did the first responders do in the incident? What did the principal do? So that in future cases, we can make sure that we've done things properly to protect our children. In this case, I would take it a step further in that releasing the tapes, that's part of the problem in our society today, is this ghoulish side that we have. It's the perverted stuff that catches our attention, not the everyday things that we can do to help people. What if there's a photo of one of the children lying dead in one of the, we're talking about tapes. Well, why isn't everything just out there then? I don't see what the purpose of a family member needs to listen to a school teacher who is working to save and protect those children. Maybe she's on the last phone call to her husband or to her child to say this is going on. Why do we need to hear that? Why do those people need to There was a photo in the paper the other day of the entranceway to the school, the glass being shot. I quite frankly, and I think I've seen a lot in my life, and I'm not scared of stuff, but I didn't want to see it because my thoughts went to those children. And to Andrew's point, I understand, but do we really need to, can we not visualize ourselves if we want to have a gun debate about this? I visualize a madman walking in there with a semi-automatic weapon and gunning down a bunch of children. I don't need to hear the sounds of all that. I can put that all together in my own mind.
If you want to engage in the gun debate, then why wouldn't you want to put yourself there, or at least hear what's being experienced in the other end of a terrorist activity like that, so that you know?
Andrew, because I'm an adult and I can understand exactly what they went through. I don't have to hear the pain.
I apologize, but I don't think you do, because you weren't there. You've never had to go through that, and we keep having this discussion in the abstract.
Do you think that
this is actually a chance to be there?
Do you think listening to those tapes are going to change my mind about a madman?
I hope they do.
And I'm not taking it out on you, but I almost find it offensive. Why do journalists need to hear those tapes? And would journalists still feel that way if it was their family?
Well, it's not just journalists, because journalists just don't sit on it. They eventually get released. So it's everybody's right to hear it, and it's for two different reasons.
Who's right?
It's for two different reasons.
I'll give a counter argument for 1 second. Imagine if we were talking about a lawmaker that was killed. Look, 50 years later, people still debating about the facts surrounding JFK's
That's someone in public office, Richard.
Okay, your distinction then becomes public office. Of course. Okay. What if there's questions surrounding the incident? I happen to agree with you guys.
But I made that point earlier. You're absolutely right about that. Law enforcement, people that elected officials, the governor's office, they should listen to those tapes and make sure. And quite frankly, I have no problem if RNN said, listen, we'd like to listen to them just to be sure that there's no hanky-panky, that the investigation's going properly, et cetera.
Martin's parents didn't want the tapes released. It was too upsetting to them, too painful for them. They didn't want to hear the last moments of their son's life.
Well, you have to.
This was a national debate about both the policy.
Richard, that's a criminal trial. That's a much different story. There's no trial here. I mean, in that case, you have to release the tapes if you want to prosecute somebody.
There's also the legal. I mean, a 911 call is a public record.
Right, I agree.
It's in the public sphere.
But Andrew, my thing this morning I said was, is there a happy medium here which says, let's appoint a nonpartisan independent board that can hear anything? And if there's anything material value of this that adds to anything that, as it relates, then let them decide. But for me, I will tell you this much. I know I'm not going to listen to the audio. Now, you're going to say that's my choice, and you're right about that. But I don't want to hear. It's like, remember when we were younger, Face the Death, the videos and stuff? I never wanted to watch that. I tell my kids, don't look when there's an accident. There's no reason you need to see, God forbid, somebody's last moments on the side of the road. There's not because, you know, they're going to get upset, that's part of it, but because none of your business. And part of me just feels, Andrew, why is it my business?
We have an independent arbiter already. It's the judge who made the ruling. You got a problem with the judge's ruling.
On a matter of law, not about the sensitivity.
Problem with the judge's ruling, change the law. But no, I don't think, because who's going to sit on that panel? Who has the final say as to what's offensive or what's not offensive?
Let me ask you a question, as a journalist, what about just the decency of journalists to say, we've heard from the parents who are very, very adamant that they don't want this released. They're out there, they could be released, but what if journalists said, you know what, we're going to hold ourselves to a different standard, and we're going to take into consideration, we're not going to release it.
It happens all the time.
Does it?
It does, where you get information and it doesn't get released for one reason or another because it either divulges personal information or its sensitivities, or there's something that's just so disturbing that there's no point in it. Or, for example, when we're covering Newtown, we, more often than not, don't mention the name of the shooter. Yep. It's an editorial decision that we make just because we don't want to glorify it.
Will you release the tapes on the show?
I don't think so. And you know what? I understand, and we have our editorial meeting in there, and Andrew, I think, will make a very compelling point that, listen, we showed the caskets coming out. That's very different. I'm not comparing the two. I thought, to me, that was the most heartbreaking scene, me personally at least. And if I was ever on the fence on the issue of this, I would have, that might have pushed me one way or the other. So to Andrew's point, if somebody hears this, that might be, it doesn't feel right that this should be part of our policy debate. This is just, and maybe it's the parent in me, but it's just that this is just the...
These are people that are at their lowest low. They don't know if their next breath is the last one they're going to take, and they're calling out for help. And we don't have a right. I don't care what journalist, some person that just wants to increase their ratings to play that tape.
Well,
it's disgusting.
We had this conversation at the Navy Yard down in Virginia recently, where they were showing the tapes of the guy, you know, going through the building, and we said, well, that poor guy at the other end of the hole, what if he was killed in this, and his wife has just seen his last moments? I mean, I didn't need to see that.
Well, with the advances in technology, and this isn't so much a technological, this is more of a legal question, but this is going to keep happening over and over again, and it's not just anymore like it used to be. You got five TV stations that have to make a decision with the reality of technology. It's just...
I know we got to go, but it doesn't work like that. It's not, you can't pick and choose which cases you get to. It's like the defense of, or the, you know, terrible defendants in the criminal system. They have to have every aspect of the law on their side, because on the case when it's your turn, you want every available avenue as well.
Andrew, in this case,
so in every case, we have to be as open as we can.
But this isn't a case, though.
But it is.
No, it's not. This is just information that is heart-wrenching to a bunch of people. It serves no purpose. As Richard pointed out, if it's not has anything to do with the investigation.
We don't know whether we're going to broadcast what's on there because we don't know what's on the tapes.
Well, Richard is going to have me and Dominic sitting on the editorial board meeting. We'll have 2 votes that day, and they won't be played.
Well, we will see here, but it's just one of those, it doesn't feel right instinctively. But we are going to ask you folks the same question at home, and I will tell you, the law and the courts were on Andrew's side on this one here, so don't think he's alone in the opinion. What do you think? Should the Newtown 911 calls be made public? Head over to our Facebook and Twitter account and sound off, please. All right, when we come back here, we're going to tie together what the Pope had to say with what's actually going on in Washington, because it bears the bigger question of whose job is it, really? Not lip service, but whose job is it, including your tax dollars, to look out for those who are having trouble looking after themselves? We're going to talk about that after this.